"Are you going to shut the door?" asked his mother. "Yes, and lock it." He did this, then kissed his mother as she turned the light out, and he lay down on his side looking at the cupboard. He felt very content. Just as he was dropping off to sleep, his eyes snapped open. He had thought he heard a little noise, but no, all was quiet. He closed his eyes again. In the morning, there was no doubt about it. The noise actually woke him up. He lay perfectly still in the dawn light, staring at the cupboard, which was now coming the most extraordinary series of sounds. A pattering, a tapping, a scrambling, and surely a high-pitched noise like, well, it's like a tiny voice. To be truthful, Omri was petrified. Who wouldn't be? Undoubtedly, there was something alive in that cupboard. Last, he put out his hand and touched it. He pulled very carefully. The door was shut tight. But as he pulled, the cupboard moved just slightly. The noise inside instantly stopped. He lay for a long time, wondering. Had he imagined it? The noise did not start again. At last, he cautiously turned the key and opened the cupboard door. The Indian was gone. Omri sat up sharply in bed and peered into the dark corners. Suddenly, he saw him. But he wasn't on the shelf anymore. He was in the bottom of the cupboard, and he wasn't standing upright. He was crouching in the darkest corner, half hidden by the front of the cupboard. And he was alive. Omri knew that immediately. To begin with, though the Indian was trying to keep perfectly still, as still as Omri had kept, lying in bed a moment ago, he was breathing heavily. His bare, bronze shoulders rose and fell, and were shining with sweat. The single feather sticking out of the back of his headband quivered, as if the Indian were trembling. And as Omri peered closer, and his breath fell on the tiny huddled figure, he saw it jump to its feet. Its minute hand made a sudden, darting movement towards his belt and came to rest clutching the handle of a knife, smaller than the shaft of a tack. Neither Omri nor the Indian moved for perhaps a minute and a half. They hardly breathed either. They just stared at each other. The Indian's eyes were black and fierce and frightened. His lips were drawn back from shining white teeth, so small you could scarcely see them except when they caught the light. He stood pressed against the inside of the wall of the cupboard, clutching his knife, rigid with terror, but defiant. The first coherent thought that came into Omri's mind as he began to get over the shock was, "I must call the others," meaning his parents and his brother. But something, he wasn't sure what, stopped him. Maybe he was afraid that if he took his eyes off the Indian even for a moment, he would vanish or become plastic again. And when the others came running, they would all laugh and accuse Omri of making things up. But who can blame anyone for not believing this unless they saw it with their own eyes? Another reason Omri didn't call anyone was that he was not dreaming and the Indian had really come alive. Certainly the most marvelous thing that had ever happened to Omri in his life, and he wanted to keep it to himself, at least at first. His next thought was that he must somehow get the Indian in his hand. He didn't want to frighten him any further, but he had to touch him. He simply had to. He reached his hand down slowly into the cupboard. The Indian gave a fantastic leap into the air. His black hair flew and the fringes on his leggings fluttered. His knife, raised above his head, flashed. He gave a shout, which, even though it was the tiniest shout to match his body, it was nevertheless loud enough to make Omri jump. Not so much as he jumped as when the little knife pierced his finger deeply into draw a drop of blood. Omri stuck his finger in his mouth and sucked on it, and thought how gigantic he must look to a tiny Indian, how fantastically brave he had been to stab him. The Indian stood there, his feet in moccasins planted apart on a white painted metal floor, his chest heaving, his knife held ready, and his black eyes quite wild. Omri thought he was magnificent. "I won't hurt you," he said. "I only want to pick you up." The Indian opened his mouth, and a stream of words spoken in a loud, tiny voice came out, not one of which Omri could understand. "Don't you speak English?" asked Omri. All the Indian in the film spoke a sort of English. It would be terrible if the Indian couldn't. How would they talk to each other? The Indian lowered his knife a fraction. I speak, he grunted. Omri breathed deeply in a sigh of relief. Oh, good. Listen, I don't know how it happened that you came to life, but it must be something to do with this cupboard, or perhaps a key. Anyway, here you are, and I think you're great, and I don't mind that you stabbed me. Only, please, can I pick you up? After all, you are my Indian, he finished in a very reasonable tone. He said all this very quickly while the Indian stared at him. The eye point went down a little farther, but he didn't answer. Well, can I? Say something, urged Omri impatiently. I speak slowly, grunted the miniature Indian at last. Oh, Omri thought, and then said very slowly, let me pick you up. The knife came up again in an instant, and the Indian's knees began bent into a crouch. No. Oh, please. You touch, I kill. The Indian growled ferociously. You might have expected Omri to laugh at this absurd threat from a tiny creature scarcely bigger than the middle finger, armed with only a pinpoint. But Omri didn't laugh. He didn't feel like laughing. This Indian, his Indian, was behaving in every way like a live Indian brave. And despite the difference in size and strength, Omri respected him, even as odd as it sounded, feared him at that very moment. Oh, okay. I won't then. But there's no need to get angry. I don't want to hurt you. Then, as the Indian looked baffled, he said in what he supposed was Indian English, me no hurt you. You come near, I hurt you, said the Indian swiftly. Omri had been half lying in bed all this time. Now cautiously and slowly he got up. His heart was thundering in his chest. He couldn't be sure why he was being cautious. Was it not to frighten the Indian, or because he was frightened himself? He wished one of his brothers would come in, or better still, his father. But no one came. Standing in his bare feet, he took the cupboard up by its top corners and turned it till it faced the window. He did this very carefully, but nevertheless the Indian was jolted and, having nothing to hold on to, fell down. But he was on his feet in a second, and he had not let go of the knife. Sorry, said Omri. The Indian responded with a noise like a snarl. There was no more conversation for the next few minutes. Omri looked at the Indian, the early sunlight. It was a splendid sight. He was just under 3 inches tall. His blue-black hair, done in plait and pressed to his head by a colored headband, gleamed in the sun. So did the minuscule muscles of his tiny naked torso and the skin of his arms. His legs were covered with buckskin leggings, which had some decorations on them too small to see properly. There was kind of a bandolier across his chest, and his belt seemed to be made of several strands of some shiny white beads. Best of all, somehow, were his moccasins. Omri found himself wondering, not for the first time recently, where his magnifying glass was. It was the only way he could ever be able to see and appreciate the intricate details of the Indian's clothes. Omri looked closely as he dared at the Indian's face. He expected to see paint on it, war paint, but there was none. The turkey feather that had been stuck in the headband came out when the Indian fell, now was lying on the floor of the cupboard. It was as big as a spike on a horse chestnut, but it was a real feather. Omri suddenly asked, were you always this small? I'm not small. You big. The Indian shouted angrily. No, began Omri, but then he stopped. He heard his mother beginning to move about in the next door. The Indian heard it too. He froze. The door of the next room opened. Omri knew any moment his mother would come in to wake him for school. In a flash, he bent down and whispered, don't worry, I'll be back. He closed and locked the cupboard door and jumped back into bed. Come on, Omri, time to get up. She bent down and kissed him, paying no attention to the cupboard, and went out again, leaving the door wide open.